Mr. Campion is a double Bruin, graduating from UCLA with a Bachelor of Arts in Economics, and then returning to earn an MBA from the Anderson School of Management. He also holds a JD and an LLM in taxation from the University of San Diego School of Law. Also, since joining Nike, Mr. Campion has become an accomplished marathoner and remains an avid Lakers fan, even in the heart of Trailblazer territory. It's an absolute honor to welcome Mr. Campion back to UCLA Anderson.
Thanks, Craig, for the nice introduction. And thank you, Dean Olian, for inviting me to be here today at UCLA. It is awesome to be back home at UCLA. I first started calling UCLA home back in 1989. I moved into Dykstra Hall as a freshman that year, and it was an awesome year. So awesome that I ended up spending another 7 years figuring out how to stay on this campus and roam around a bit. Love this place, and it's great to be back. My wife, who's here, is also a UCLA alum. She's here with our kids, who are all decked out in some UCLA gear. And we'll certainly be down in Westwood watching the Bruins beat USC tonight. Unfortunately, our dog and our in-house mascot, Josephine Bruin, was not able to make the trip down from Oregon. So, I have been fortunate over time to have spent time learning at 3 of the most highly regarded institutions in the world: UCLA, Disney, and Nike. And when I met with Dean Olian over the holidays, what the dean asked me to do was reflect on some of the learnings that I'd had at those institutions before we moved into Q&A and took some of the questions you guys have for me. I was, as I said, very fortunate to spend 3 decades here, Disney and Nike. What I didn't realize was just how fortunate I was at the time. It's only when you reflect on the lessons that you've learned that you realize how truly valuable they are. What you'll find is that the learnings that you're gaining here at Anderson will actually serve as a foundation upon which you'll build throughout your career. I believe that over time, you build the capacity to lead, especially on a large scale, by consolidating the learnings that you get from others primarily. People say that he or she is a born leader. I actually don't subscribe to that notion. I think it's something you learn over time, and certainly I think that makes all of you probably feel a little bit better about the money that you're spending to be here and get some of those learnings. So, where to begin? Leadership lessons. Bill Bowerman, who co-founded Nike with Phil Knight, once said something to Tinker Hatfield, one of our most highly regarded designers and innovators. He said, if you're going to be a leader, you better know where you're going if you expect people to follow you. I assume that many of you here at UCLA have taken a strategy class. And unless the curriculum's changed, one of the first principles you learn in strategy is you have to have a clear mission statement. And then you probably start reading some of those mission statements. And then your eyes start to glaze over. Maybe you start to fall asleep, literally in class. And there's a reason for that. Many of them lack any real direction. They speak to things like market share or metrics and refer to industries. Let's consider Nike for a moment. I assume that everyone in this room has experienced the Nike brand, be it by wearing our performance product on the playing field. Maybe you got inspiration from one of your favorite athletes or teams, like one of mine, the Lakers, the Bruins. Maybe you're a little obsessed with cool sneakers, like me. That's good too. We're happy to have you as part of the brand in that regard as well. The reality is Nike is, and has been for decades, one of the coolest, most authentic, most inspirational and innovative brands in the world. And that doesn't happen by accident. It begins with our mission. Nike's mission is to provide inspiration and innovation to every athlete in the world. And we put a little asterisk on the word athlete, noting that if you have a body, you're an athlete. So think about that. In less than 20 words, think about what our mission says. It very concisely articulates our reason for being, the distinctive value that we as an enterprise hope to bring to consumers. Inspiration and innovation, those are our priorities. 2 of them, not a long list of them. Our priority isn't market share, it's inspiration, innovation. Sport, which is clearly evident in our mission, is our passion. And our mission taps into that emotionally. Our mission does another thing. It articulates how massive we believe our opportunity is. It speaks to if you have a body, you're an athlete. That's everyone. We literally aspire to help everyone in the world, all 7 billion people of the consumers in the world, achieve their full potential. That mission doesn't just guide us strategically. It fuels our culture. We're driven by a diverse group of over 60,000 employees around the world. That's a lot of people to lead and manage. Again, think about that. If you're going to be a leader, you better know where you're going. Why? Because we've got over 60,000 people that are looking for direction. All of those people around the world, via our mission statement, are bonded over a passion for sport and a desire to help others achieve their full potential. That was what has helped Nike stand the test of time, remain a leader, and continue to extend its leadership position. I couldn't possibly share with you all the lessons that I've learned on my path to leadership at Nike. I'd love to. Those who know me know I can talk and chat a bit, so if you had a few hours, I would try. But the reality is that there are just a few that keep coming back to you. You keep reflecting on them because they're more powerful than the others. So I'm going to share a few of those. I'm going to share them in a framework, though. I'm going to share them in a framework, pairs. And the reason is because one of the lessons that you learn as a leader actually has to do with the framework I'm about to share, which is managing paradox. Often people think leaders are decision makers. I think we've had a politician who once said, "I'm the decider." The reality as a leader is you're not often choosing between option A or option B, or working through a checklist sequentially. What you're often challenged with is taking 2 objectives that seem contradictory and striking the right balance, or trying to optimize against both objectives. So, let me start with a couple. First, one of the lessons I learned is you've got to master the fundamentals. Business is complex, and large enterprises are not just run based on common sense alone. We all kind of hope that sometimes. We all start out hoping that a little common sense, work ethic, and an engaging personality, maybe problem solving, that'll solve it. But actually the reality is it takes a lot of rigor to lead a large enterprise. But the second lesson is that you've got to become comfortable leveraging intuition. They seem contradictory. You got to master the fundamentals. You're learning those fundamentals here at Anderson, from strategic frameworks to valuation to rigorous analytics. And at Nike, we leverage all of those concepts. For example, our growth strategy, which we refer to as the category offense, is a segment to grow strategy. It's a concept you learn in business school, and it's written about in a lot of business books. That concept, applied at Nike, the category offense, takes our billions of consumers around the world and segments them down through the lens of the sports they love. And why do we do that? The same reason other companies use a segment to grow strategy. We're looking to gain deeper insights at a more granular level into categories of consumers so that we can better serve them in more compelling ways. That said, to the paradox, at the same time, truly innovative ideas are not conceived on a spreadsheet. So my hunch is a number of you in this room prior to business school, or maybe even currently while you're attending, have had a job with the title analyst in it. And if you haven't, you're probably going to. And most of the jobs, if you go over to the recruiting center, probably say analyst, senior analyst. There's some kind of analysis in it, certainly in the description. Unfortunately, what we all come to realize over time is that there is no supercomputer or algorithm that can take consumer insights and translate those through some kind of automated process into a relentless flow of new innovative products. It doesn't happen without intuition. You have to develop your own intuition and be confident leveraging it, And even more importantly, you've got to seek the intuition that other people have gained from experience. That's one of the fundamental principles for me of learning, is becoming a leader has less to do with what you were born with. Actually, most of what you learn that gives you that capacity to lead, you learn from others. I've been super fortunate, as I said, to be at some great institutions. But why am I fortunate? Not necessarily just because the brand on the door. It's because of people like Bob Iger or Tom Staggs at Disney, Mark Parker at Nike, people who have had unbelievable experience and then shared those experiences with me to help me leverage their intuition to build my own. A brief anecdote, when I was at Disney, I had a transaction that I was working on. It was actually selling one of our sports franchises. And we got into a really complicated situation. And Michael Eisner called me up to his office. And he proceeded to tell me a story about Heaven Can Wait, and Frank Wells and Warren Beatty. And I, of course, thought, where is this? This doesn't have anything to do with what we're working on. But by the end of the story, we actually did exactly what he was recommending. And what he was recommending came from a completely different context. And so I think just recognizing that you're going to learn over time from others, and that learning is going to help you develop the intuition that's required to accomplish great things. Your goal as a leader in managing that paradox is to marry those truly innovative ideas that are born from intuition into fundamentally sound strategic and financial plans. And those are the fundamentals you're learning here. As a CFO, I'm responsible for resource allocation across a fairly large enterprise. I hear a lot of fantastic ideas, usually because people want money. And I get a lot of proposals. And the reality is, actually, most of the ideas are pretty fantastic. Certainly at Nike they are, and they were at Disney. But we can't do them all. And so what I often use as a simple phrase to clarify how we're going to move forward is, the best ideas don't always get funded, but the best plans do. Take Nike Flyknit, for example. We had an insight. Our insight was that we could create a more lightweight, comfortable, customizable shoe with all of the characteristics of a shoe that a runner needs: structure, support, cushioning, etc. And we believed we could do that with yarn. See the spool of yarn on the image. Making the uppers essentially on a knitting machine. Had never been done. And before it could be done, it required significant investment from a manufacturing process. So we began with an idea. And frankly, we all got pretty excited about the idea. And the next step was getting our head around what we needed to do to bring it to life, and that required some investment. What we landed on was the idea coupled with a detailed product, as we call it brand, or in business school you may learn it as marketing, and distribution, or as we call it marketplace strategy at Nike. Again, frameworks you learn in business school that you apply against an intuitive idea to accomplish great things. Today, just a couple years after launching Flyknit, actually about 3 years after launching Flyknit at the London Olympics, we now sell millions of pairs of Flyknit shoes. So again, it was an idea that we couldn't prove would work. We had to use some intuition. We now sell millions of pairs of shoes across running, football, basketball, sportswear. But things didn't always go according to plan. And that brings me to another lesson. One of the most important aspects of being a leader is being an optimist. I learned that from Bob Iger at Disney about 10 years ago as he was transitioning into the CEO role at Disney. In fact, I had the pleasure of spending a little bit of time with him yesterday, and we reflected on that. And over the last 10 years, our CEO at Nike, Mark Parker, has reinforced that time and time again. And the reason both of those two leaders did that is both companies are inherently companies that are fueled by creativity and innovation. So be an optimist. Why? The reason is because pessimism stifles creativity and innovation. You can always find a reason not to do something that's never been done before. But optimism finds a way and finds a solution. So I'd encourage you guys to keep that philosophy in the front of your mind as you elevate into leadership roles. 2 more lessons that I feel like are a bit of a paradox. First, business is a team sport. At the same time, you've often heard you've heard this, I'm sure, before from other leaders. You have to continually seek the best talent. You have to ask yourself as a leader, of everyone on the planet, do I have the most talented and diverse individuals in every role in my organization? In business, like in sports, it's more about the name on the front of the jersey than the name on the back. And you have to fuel that culture. Early in your career, you're going to feel a different pull. You're going to feel a pull to highlight your individual accomplishments because that's how you get ahead. That's how you move through the ranks. That is actually how you get ahead to some extent and move through the ranks early on, but that runs out on you because as you progress through the ranks, what you realize is that if you aspire to be a leader and you're working with other leaders, one of the most important skills they're looking for you and that they value is your ability to use collaboration to drive alignment across cross-functional teams and large organizations. And there's some good news in there. It's not a sacrifice. It's not like you're sacrificing your own personal accomplishment for the common good. The good news is that ultimately, you will get much more accomplished if you aren't worried about who gets the credit. And if you get a lot more accomplished, the spoils are plentiful and they go to the winners. At Nike, there is no other way. We actually structure ourselves so that is a fact of life, not a nice to have. Our organizational structure is a matrix. You're going to learn about matrix organizations over the course of your time here at Anderson. You're going to hear pros, cons, people who've worked in ones that worked, people who've worked in ones that don't work. But the secret ingredient in the ones that work and why it's so, that skill set is so important to us is that it requires collaboration and alignment. And we've purposely structured ourselves to get that because of that philosophy that it's more about the name on the front of the jersey than the back. At the same time, again, as a leader, you must be able to recruit and retain or draft a team comprised of all all-stars in every role. That means individuals who've become accustomed to putting up big numbers, like LeBron James, like Kobe Bryant, and being recognized publicly and very openly as the best. At Nike, we aspire to be the most authentic, connected, inspiring, and innovative brand in the world. Think about that for a second. That's no small feat. In the world. Think about the world, Russia, Brazil, etc. It reminds me of another anecdote. Many of you have probably seen this, the Most Interesting Man advertisement. And I think there's a quote in there that he speaks Russian fluently in French. The reality is our mission actually kind of pushes us almost in the direction of being actually that dynamic. We can't accomplish that without extraordinary talent. And that talent has to bring to Nike diverse global perspectives to help us connect with each of those consumers around the world on a more personal level and a level where they can say themselves on an individual level, Nike is bringing me that inspiration and innovation they promised. As Michael Jordan once said, talent wins games, teamwork wins championships. You need both. The best player in the world, the most talented player in the world, who frankly knows from experience that talent can win games. He won some games by himself. But what he knows is you need both. He didn't believe that he alone could win a championship. Actually, we're seeing that all over the place in sports today. We're seeing incredibly talented individuals who, based on social media and otherwise, are actually getting even more recognition than players like Michael Jordan got. And what are they doing? They're trying to pull together a diverse team that can help them win a championship. That's actually one of the reasons I'm here today. Anderson is renowned for the talent that it attracts and for the diversity of global perspectives represented in this room. So, in that regard, it shouldn't be any surprise that over half of the MBAs that we hire, the MBA interns that we've hired at Nike over the last several years, come from UCLA. And you might be thinking you saw that picture of me and my wife and my kids and all our UCLA gear. Maybe I'm putting my thumb on the scale. I'm actually not. I love UCLA, and I'm always encouraging people to look to UCLA as a source of talent. I actually had that made evident to me from our HR organization, from scouring the MBAs that we've hired and saying, you know, there's actually a theme here as you're heading down to UCLA, and that theme is UCLA. Again, I'm not putting my thumb on the scale, and I can't do that as a leader. I have to stay objective. But fortunately, Dean Olian and her faculty are making it a lot easier for me. They're bringing all those folks that I'd have to go try to find around the world here to UCLA, and we're really fortunate to be connecting with this student population in the way that we have over the last several years. And I know some of you in the room, can't see everyone in the room, but I know some of you in the room spent the summer up at UCLA, and some of you are probably coming back too. Okay, 2 more lessons that also seem contradictory. They're actually more kind of mantras or philosophies that I've leveraged over time. Stick the landing. You can kind of picture what I'm talking about there, I assume. And there is no finish line. We've all probably watched gymnastics, probably in the Olympics. That's where we all probably watch it, right? But if we're being honest, many of us don't have any clue how difficult or amazing any of the elements of the routine are. Any of them. We're watching flips, turns, etc. But there's one thing we do all know. If you don't stick the landing, you're probably not going to get a very good score. In fact, we're often sitting there holding our breath until that decisive moment. It's actually not all that different in business, particularly at the leadership level. Consider presentations to senior management or the board of directors or partners, or consider revealing a new product to consumers. A lot of work goes into those moments, if you will. You have to give yourself enough space to ensure that that final product or moment meets the audience's expectations or standards for excellence, especially in situations where you have to solve a complex problem. In those situations, and I think unfortunately we've all been there before, some of these lessons make you cringe when you think back and roll your own tape. You develop this tendency. You know it's complex and you worked really hard on it, and so you want to show your homework. And you know you got to get to the point eventually, but you want to show the homework. And you spend a lot of time figuring out how to show your homework. But in the end, showing your homework is never a substitute for a final product that fails to meet the expectations of the audience. In business, the goal is actually not to burden everybody with the complexity. It's to take the complexity and make it simple, so that folks who don't necessarily have all the same context or expertise can align cross-functionally against what you're proposing. At Nike, we have a maxim that speaks to this. And actually, our maxims are very powerful at Nike. By maxims, we mean values or the philosophies that drive us. And you're often in a meeting at Nike where someone will take a maxim and kind of verbally slap it on the table. There's a debate, and it's a circular conversation, and someone just goes, you know what? We got to simplify and go. That's actually one of our maxims. And the number of meetings I've been in have been countless, where it's a complex situation and we're wrestling with it and debating, and someone goes, you know what? We got to simplify and go. And what happens? We decide there's one thing that's most important, and there are 3 strategic imperatives or dimensions of that goal that we need to get after. And that's where we really start to get traction. So, I said sticking the landing kind of implies a bit of finality or an end to the process. But the reality is that those milestones, those meetings, are actually journeys along the path toward what you're trying to accomplish or your full potential. At Nike, we continue to push ourselves based on that other philosophy. There is no finish line. This actually is a picture from my office. My desk looks right at this, up at this quote all day. It's one of my favorites. It actually dates back to the founding of Nike with Bill Bowerman and Phil Knight. And from a leadership development perspective, it's critical. You've got to push yourself to keep learning, especially as a leader when others start to tell you you've arrived or you've made it, or worse, when you start to think that yourself. You've got to stay on the offense always. When you're a leader as an enterprise, someone always wants a little piece of what you got. They want some of your market, they want to connect with your consumer, they'd love a little of your revenue, and they'd be thrilled with some of your profit. So what you got to do is continually refine your game in order to extend that leadership position, both over time and actually in terms of separating from the competition. So at Nike, like a runner who's just finished a race, we always believe and push ourselves to think that our personal best is not the record we just set. Our personal best is always something that's still out in front of us. All right, finally. Actually, it's one phrase with the paradox right in it. You guys have probably heard the phrase, it's business, it's not personal. That phrase makes absolutely no sense. It's a cliche that everyone uses. It's business, not personal. It's sort of absurd when you think about it. People actually are the ingredient to create amazing results in a business. The reality is it's business and it's personal. In fact, you might even flip them. It's personal and it's business. It's business and it's personal. The phrase doesn't make sense. You need to understand what motivates your team and how you can deliver on that. You need to understand what people value, what their strengths are, and how you can enable them showing their strength and putting their strength to good use. You need to help them avoid their derailers. In short, as a leader, it's critical that you develop a personal relationship with your team. That's actually one of the unique elements of being a leader. You can be an individual contributor in an organization and be relatively siloed, but as a leader, you've got to push yourself to create the space to develop those personal relationships. And there's something that's even a little more powerful. What's more powerful is when you push yourself to share that same dimension about yourself with the team. When you've got members of your team that actually have a pretty deep understanding of what motivates you, what your strengths are, and more importantly, what your derailers are. And when you do that, the results are pretty phenomenal. Essentially, when you do that, you get a level of understanding and trust amongst your team that makes you unbelievably faster. It drives you to the results even faster than you can imagine. So, with that, I want to thank you for inviting me back to UCLA. To the point about it's personal, I look forward to meeting a lot of you and the reception to follow, and as I get to engage with UCLA more over time. And I hope that me sharing some of what I've learned ends up being as of much value to you as you ascend into leadership roles as what I learned from all of those people I've mentioned and more that shared their learnings with me over time. So with that, I think we'll transition over to Q&A.
Well, thank you for that, Andy. That was great. Before you sit down, please flash your sneakers.
Oh, I'd be happy.
Look at those Bruin sneakers. Are they not great? And
you can find those at Nike.com if you're wondering.
Yeah. Well, and I might add that they're not the official Bruin sneaker yet. The contract is up in 2017 if you really like those sneakers. I want to thank everyone for coming. Thank you, Craig, for that great introduction. I'll ask a few questions, and then I'll turn it over to you to ask Andy questions. And first of all, we're incredibly proud that you're a double Bruin, that your wife is a Bruin. And we, of course, attribute all your success to us. But there were probably a couple of leaders. You spoke about some of the really important learning moments, but you've had the opportunity to work with some really iconic leaders, Bob Iger, Mark Parker, and of course Phil Knight. Can you tell us anything in particular that you've learned from those leaders?
Sure, I've learned a tremendous amount, but a few maybe of the more salient things I've learned from them. I talked about how both Bob Iger at Disney and Mark Parker share optimism in common, and they have that mentality, that no finish line mentality. They have something else in common, and it goes to the nature of its business and its personal. And it's not just relative to the two of them. I think actually if you look across leadership broadly, what you find is the notion that great leaders realize that the more inclusive they are of people's perspectives, the greater the ability they have to achieve what they're trying to accomplish and their full potential. And you find leaders from time to time in your career that have camps. So-and-so's in this person's camp, so-and-so's in that person's camp, or this is their trusted network, that's their trusted network. Those two leaders in particular, along with a lot of others, don't have camps. In fact, an anecdote, I shouldn't probably talk too much about Mark. I know this ends up on video, but fortunately it'd be flattering, so hopefully he's pleased. But Mark has a couple of really interesting ways that his leadership comes to life that's incredibly empowering. One, when he's got a question or when he's looking to get something accomplished, he doesn't work hub and spoke. He doesn't go to who's technically responsible for this or that. He actually makes the rounds. He's known to do a lap and sit down with you and ask you the question and maybe talk to you about the issue. And frankly, sometimes you go away and you kind of go like, hey, that's not even my job. But he thinks I'm the one that's going to solve that. And then over the next few hours, you start chatting with your colleagues and you realize, oh, he asked everybody that question. And that kind of goes to a second one, which is asking questions. I think there's, fundamentally what motivates people, what really gets people inspired is when they're able to do something that it's exceeded someone else's expectations. When you're able to autonomously create something that someone maybe didn't even imagine or task you with creating. And what Mark does, that's something that I've tried to employ more, and I think a lot of people should consider applying more, is he asks a lot of questions. He doesn't make a lot of statements. His questions can be leading, directive. Sometimes they are purely just open-ended and in terms of intellectual curiosity. But what he's really doing is leaving you that space to go answer it. Even if it's directive or leading, you leave going, I'm going to go answer that question with my team. And it's really empowering. And when you do and you deliver great results, you feel great about it. You don't feel like you just went and got a task done for somebody.
Now you said, you mentioned this isn't my job. Of course, you're the CFO and you're the EVP. How do you conceptualize your job? You're in finance. Are you also a strategic partner? Is it about talent, attraction and retention? Is it about management? How do you conceptualize your job as the CFO?
There are a couple of dimensions to that. You're right. I think you do end up at a level from a leadership perspective where it is less about your functional responsibilities. It's more about the enterprise objectives. And the fact that, again, the name on the front of the jersey is much more important than the name on the back. And sometimes that name on the back is your name, sometimes it's your function. But you got to really stay focused on the enterprise goals. And I think the best leaders actually embody what's called kind of a T-type approach to leadership. The vertical aspect of a T, very deep functionally, but the ability to think broadly across other functions. And they develop that, again, they build that capacity over time by seeking out learnings and insights from folks in those other functions. Actually, one of my partners at Nike is a guy named Davide Grassa, who spent some time here with the MEMS organization at UCLA. Marketing and finance. At a lot of companies, those two folks don't get along that well. He's a close friend and an unbelievable business partner, and he's an example of someone that I try to learn from, and I think to some extent he tries to learn from me to develop that kind of horizontal bar on the T.
By the way, some of these questions may be familiar to you because they were culled from faculty and student questions, so thank you for submitting them. Nike is enormous and frankly dwarfs any other player in the industry. It's about $30 billion today. And Mark Parker has stated that you want to grow it in 2020 to $50 billion. You've been growing at 8.5% a year. You already control, I read, 62% of the athletic shoe market. Professor Sood told me that it's 90% of the elite shoe market. So to get there, you're going to have to grow at 10% a year. Tell us how.
So I spoke a little bit about our mantra, there is no finish line, and that actually applies to how we think about markets as well. I think I also mentioned sometimes you'll read a mission statement and it'll speak to market share. That's not where we start at Nike. In terms of no finish line, our philosophy is that there's always a greater distance between us and the potential, or our potential, than there is between us and where we started, or us and our competition, frankly. And so where we start with is start with the consumer and the athlete. Develop increasingly more detailed and deeper insights on those consumers and grow the market, not take share. Again, back to the spoils go to the winner. When you grow the market, you end up getting share along the way too. But it's really about that full potential and growing the market. And today, digital, for example, has completely transformed the notion of segment to grow. If you think about it, segment to grow starts with the notion of it's a big market and I'm already a leader, so I got to segment it down and figure out how I can be a leader in the different segments. The power of digital technology takes the notion of segments and says, I can be one-to-one and personal at scale. Ultimately across all 7 billion. You got to start somewhere. But again, back to there's no finish line. To us, we look at something like that and say, yeah, just like we thought. There's even greater opportunity than several years ago we might have thought if we just thought about share dynamics within an existing market.
So let's go to digital. That's different from your traditional direct reach to wholesalers and retailers. And in a sense, you might be disintermediating them. How is that going to affect your relationships with some very traditional channels for Nike?
Yeah, it's a great question, and one we think a ton about from a strategy, a mid to long range planning perspective, an annual operating plan perspective. It's an extraordinary dynamic. Digital is transforming everything we do, from how we create product. Just yesterday, we had announced that we had a partnership with DreamWorks. I was out with DreamWorks, understanding how we might be able to leverage their digital technology in a better way or in an interesting way to aid us in our design and creation of product. It's certainly impacting to the positive how we connect with consumers, as I just talked about, and it's also impacting that third pillar strategy, the consumer experience in the market. And by that I do mean both bricks and mortar and digitally. It's becoming a more seamless market. You're not choosing between channels, you're leveraging digital to expand the market.
So you actually feel that retail might grow from the digital contact?
Yeah, it's two phenomenons. One, we think digital actually helps you better serve consumers. Right. That should grow the market. I think one of the other phenomenons is really more our strategy. We look at the market and we always start with the consumer. We don't start with channels out. And when we look at the market, we think there are still endless opportunities, even in a market like the US, to dimensionalize it. And so we can look across our wholesale partners, our owned brick and mortar doors, digital, and we do. And what we do is look at opportunities to further segment and differentiate those experiences so that when consumers interact with us at those points, we're not going to be everywhere. But our wholesale partners, our bricks and mortar, and our digital business allow us increasingly so to be everywhere. But they also create so much capacity that we think there's an opportunity for everyone in the ecosystem to grow the more we connect at a category and consumer level.
So digital is not only impacting channel and distribution issues, but also advertising. You've shifted away from TV and print. I saw that you slashed your traditional marketing budgets by about 40% to move to a lot more of the online social media and viral marketing strategy. So talk about that.
Yeah, we at Nike, we started one-to-one. So when you think about digital allowing you to be more personal and one-to-one, Nike started with could create a more innovative product for athletes. And they started by creating those products, loading them up in a van, and going around to track meets and other events around Oregon and connecting with people one-to-one and understanding what products worked for them and what didn't. As we got bigger over time, we again saw that opportunity to innovate for and inspire for a much bigger population. We now operate in over 190 countries. But our ability to connect with, inspire, and innovate for was somewhat limited. And we had to do it in more mass ways, dimensionalized but mass. What digital is allowing us to do now is take both notions and collapse them. Basically get back to one-to-one engagement, deep brand engagement, knowing our consumers to serve them, but do it at scale. And so it's less about favoring one medium versus another. It's more about leveraging now what's available to us to get back to our roots and be more deeply connected with consumers.
You mentioned 190 countries. By the way, maybe a couple more questions and then you'll have some time. 190 countries. China is a big one.
Yeah.
And China has had some rough waters recently, both in terms of consumer markets and the currency devaluation. How's that affecting Nike? And I understand that isn't Michael Jordan there now or was recently there because it's so important to you to send those big stars there.
Yeah, I mean, I'll take the last notion first. One of the things I talked about is us making sure that we push ourselves to be authentic and connected with our consumers around the world. And actually, at Nike, it starts with the athlete, and the athletes we partner with have the same goal. And so whether it's Michael Jordan, Kobe, LeBron, Kevin Durant, others, they push themselves to be of those markets. And so we do actually, with our athletes, spend a lot of time in those markets. Back to China. So we're very mindful of the macroeconomics and the dynamics in China. How could you not be? Every day it's in the news. And as you noted, they do impact us on a macro scale to some extent in terms of what's going on relative to oil or to foreign currency. That can impact our sourcing. At the same time, we believe China is a tremendous opportunity for Nike. We have significant momentum there now, and we do feel like we can sustain that momentum because that momentum is really rooted in our strategies, coupled with some really interesting dynamics for us in China. It's obviously, as everyone would tell you, an incredibly attractive market because of an emerging middle class. Because as even China, from a government perspective, has said, growth in China economically will actually start to be more so fueled by consumption. That favors Nike. But what really favors Nike, and at the same time gives us an opportunity to fuel, is sport in China. The Chinese consumer has long been passionate about sport, and we've all heard about their passion for basketball. Mostly from a fan perspective. In the past, very few people actually, as we would say, played with a whistle, played basketball where there was a ref with a whistle competitively. Increasingly, we're seeing those numbers explode. Sport participation in sports like basketball, there's tremendous momentum in running of late in China. And that's obviously where we're focused. We're focused on, it is obviously an enormous country. And when we think about our mission, that if you have a body, you're an athlete. There's over 1 billion people. There's over a billion athletes in China, and so
a lot of bodies.
It's been a great source of momentum for us. But we think the opportunities are even greater.
But then, from a currency standpoint, is the blow softened for you in a sense by producing there, or how do you deal with the repatriation issues of funds?
Yeah, it's and I can do this with this group. You guys are
MBAs.
You're a technical group, so currency in general is an interesting dynamic. I think what we've become resolved to, so to speak, we prefer this isn't the case, but it is that we're going to be in a pretty dynamic and volatile macroeconomic environment. It is, maybe to overuse a cliche, the new normal. And so we've got a couple of dimensions we look at in that regard. One of them is we look at our business on a currency neutral basis to ensure, again, that from a consumer first perspective, we're capitalizing on the opportunities we see to serve the consumer. I guess, not diluted by the math around currency. But we're a Dow 30 company. We're a global enterprise that also has a mission, or an objective, which is to translate that value we create for consumers into shareholder value. So from a currency perspective, we have a couple of things, a couple of strategies that we use. One, we have a trading company, which touches on your point. I'll touch on in a second. And then a very sophisticated hedging program. Our trading company takes those potentially offsetting risks and optimizes the offsetting of those risks. And China is certainly a market where we do source a fair amount of product, but we also sell a fair amount of product. And so those offsetting factors, our trading company uses those rather than hedging from a gross perspective, the risks, we look at the net. Our hedging strategy Actually, the main point of our hedging strategy, a lot of people talk about hedging making earnings more predictable, et cetera. That's certainly a benefit of it. For us, we think of it strategically. Our hedging strategy allows us to hedge volatile currencies out a year, maybe longer, and use those to ensure we're delivering appropriate near-term financial performance, but we're keeping our eye on the real ball, which is continuing to invest to fuel long-term growth. It gives us the time to pause, manage the levers that we can within our business to ensure we strike that balance.
This will be my last question, so remember to think of yours. You have a stable of athletes that is enviable, and some of them actually carry industries. You know, my husband is a tennis player. He'll probably use any racket that Roger Federer uses. And yet, there are sometimes risks with athletes. So how do you assess both the potential and the risk of an athlete before you sign them, and then how do you manage them and their conduct when they are in your stable?
Yeah. First, Nike will always be connected with the world's greatest athletes, teams, federations. And that's because athletes for us are an incredible source of inspiration and insights that help us innovate. And so that will always be core to our strategy. And it's actually in a way where our strategy starts. We often say it starts with the athlete. At the same time, you can't predict everything that's going to happen over time. You talked about contracts. Certainly our contracts are structured so they give us protections in the event that something we couldn't predict happens and we feel like we need to be protected. The reality is that we have to evaluate all of those on a case-by-case basis. The risks that materialize are different in terms of their nature, in terms of their magnitude, and so we push ourselves to analyze them on a case-by-case basis in the context of our goal, which is to continue to leverage that connection with the athlete, to then translate it into innovation, inspiration that makes everybody better and help them reach their full potential.
And if it doesn't quite go right, what happens? I mean, with the athlete. How do you manage out of a bad contract, in a sense?
Really, I mean, there are two dimensions. One is contracts can give you certain protections in the event that you can't otherwise work your way through in a non-contractual or legal way. And so oftentimes that second avenue is where the case-by-case basis comes in, and we evaluate the circumstances. But we do have contracts that give us quite a bit of protection.
Your questions. And there are microphones there in the center of the room. Please introduce yourself. And keep the questions brief if you don't mind.
D. Walters. When Kevin Durant came into the league, he was not much of a negotiator. And at 24, 25, he indicated that he was going to become more business savvy. He came very close to leaving you last year. In order to retain him, did you give you or a colleague of yours, did you give one of these inspirational speeches, or did you simply come up with the number that he wished to hear?
That's a good question. Actually, as I said, I think the most important element in our relationship with the athlete is actually the relationship. Of course, as is documented in the press, athletes, based on their accomplishments and based on a lot of other things that they do, like many of us, have an opportunity to gain economically as well. What we really, I think, focus on and pride ourselves on is the relationship with the athlete. And so I wouldn't necessarily say it's an inspirational presentation, but what we do hope over time, and we do develop over time with athletes like Kevin Durant, Kobe, LeBron, and others, is a deep personal connection with those athletes. And it's interesting when you say they become savvy about business. It's actually part of that learning we talked about earlier. You can learn something from anybody. We learn a lot from the athletes, and what we actually often find is athletes, all of our athletes, Kobe's a great example, is often looking to us to help them think about that next phase of their life, when they go into business. And fortunately, in my role, that's something I get to partake in a little bit. I don't partake in so much the sports marketing side as much as I do when an athlete's kind of looking to get some insights from us from a business perspective.
I think what Andy's saying is, how do they manage their multiple millions is what he advises them on. Other questions?
Yeah.
Go ahead. Oh.
So, I'm Ezra Freck, and you've done so much for the disabled community already, making the LeBron shoes and the Nike tread that I'm actually wearing right now. So, what's next?
Great question.
That
Thank
is
you.
a great question. I would actually encourage all of you to the shoe you mentioned. There's a video that's worth getting on the internet and looking at. A shoe that LeBron and our CEO, Mark Parker, our CEO is actually our innovator-in-chief, our designer-in-chief in a way. Mark came up through design. And what happened was a young man actually reached out to us and said, hey, I have some complicating factors in terms of what it would take for product to help me reach my full potential. And again, back to that point of a mission, that's the kind of thing that grabs a Mark Parker. It actually grabbed another designer, a guy named Toby Hatfield at Nike. One of the things you should know is those experiences actually push us. One of the things our innovators talk about is the more complex the challenge, it actually pushes us to create even more innovative solutions. So as Mark would say, if you listen to our earnings call, we're really excited about the pipeline, but he's often, unfortunately, left to just leave a little bit of a tease, but until we actually formally announce that. But I would tell you to rest assured that there's a lot of energy and focus at Nike on leveraging those unique situations to create amazing products.
Thank you. Anyone else? Well, I'll ask in the meantime if you think of, I have two more questions, but I'm happy to interrupt for others. Technology has been a big part for Nike. And with technology, smart clothing, 3D printing, you're dabbling in all, and I'm sure much more. And I can ask also, what's next in the technology arena, and how are you going to couple that with your mission?
Yeah. I think one of the things that's really, there's a quote, I think it's by a futurist or a philosopher that says, the future is here, it's just unevenly distributed. And that's something we push ourselves on at Nike, because one of the things we push ourselves to do is innovate and create the future. And right now, a lot of that future that's here that's not fully distributed is technology enabled. And it's actually something that's been core to us since the beginning. We have a sports research lab. We put our products to the test on athletes in very scientific ways. And so the opportunities, frankly, are pretty endless in terms of, and to give a little bit more specificity, one of the things we encourage people to do is do more. I think a few of you have probably heard the phrase, just do it. It's part of our brand. Part of our brand is, how do we invite people to do more? One of the ways you invite people to do more these days is community and connecting people and giving them insight into how they can do more. Another fundamental priority for us is, how do we help people get better? Everybody wants to get better. I think there was, I'm a fan of the show Friday Night Lights. There was a quote on the show, every day you get a little bit better, a little bit worse. Let's make today a day we get a little bit better. Technology in terms of performance tracking, coaching, certainly is starting to offer that opportunity, and that's fundamental to our brand. How it'll manifest itself in terms of products and services, and in terms of products that we create or products that we partner with people to create, still remains to be seen. I mean, obviously that'll be core to what we do for decades to come. It's not just about what the next product in the pipeline is, but certainly a huge opportunity for us.
Well, we're very grateful that you hire MBAs and MBAs from Anderson who share success, think fearlessly, and drive change. How do you use MBA talent within Nike?
Actually, one of the great things about Nike from a talent perspective is there's a synergy at Nike. Our consumer brand as well as our employment brand, is very similar. We see tremendous potential in people from an athlete and sport perspective, and it actually carries over to how we think about talent within our organization. We have a chief operating officer, for example, who originally joined Nike as a controller from Price Waterhouse. Our head of our global categories, so really where product, consumer insights, product, and brand are conceived from a strategic perspective, was a tax guy in the probably big six at the time, and he came in as an MBA into a strategic planning role. So we use MBAs in a variety of ways. What I'm most proud of is that over the last several years, what we've said is, let's find the best entry points for MBAs, because we've seen them go on to realize that potential into very diverse roles in the company. Let's create more of an opening. And we've done that particularly in the finance and strategic planning function. We've done it to some extent in marketing as well. So initially coming in, we look for that area where you can take those fundamentals you're learning in business school that you're mastering and feel like you're contributing right out of the gate. But the great thing, again, at Nike is we're always pushing ourselves to identify that potential. And then, frankly, sometimes Nike is a bit of a free agent market. Once you're in Nike and you're delivering results and you show that you can work collaboratively as a team, those kind of general managers throughout want you on their team. And so you feel a pull market into pretty exciting roles.
I want to thank you for being here, and we brought you something to wear on your next marathon here. Awesome. A UCLA sweatshirt here. Awesome. And we hope that it brings you to the finish line, which is really not the finish line. So thank you so much, Andy. That was good.